happening on the screen.
Well, there we go. Hello, everyone. We are back here at HELPtalk, but not without its challenges. We know how technology can work, and we are missing our trusted and wonderful co-host here, Phil Vetrano. He is sunning his toes in the sand in Florida as we speak, but that's okay because we've got a great guest here with us today. Deborah Kaminetzky is a triple certified PMP, CSM, and LSSGB, that's lots of letters, project manager. She's got a unique background. She's done a little bit of this and that, getting into RFIs and RFPs and software and handling setups and rollouts and all that kind of thing, which is really perfect because we had a tech issue that we've never encountered before. So, Deb, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we're going to get in because what you do is project management, right? And in fact, your company is called DeFacto Project Manager. And so you've had a lot of experience. Maybe just set our audience up. What are the kinds of things that you've done in your background that have really helped you streamline and get ready for how to project manage your life, right? Which is today's topic.
Right. Thank you. So I'm going to get into a little bit of a disclaimer here because one of the things I did prior to project management is I was actually a practicing attorney. So we just love disclaimers. So yes. Even though I am a licensed attorney, I am not your attorney and no legal advice is being provided. This episode does not take the place of the advice of a licensed therapist or other qualified professional. So now that we've gotten that out there, I'll go ahead and answer your questions. So essentially, project management is something that when I was in school, in high school and college, I wasn't even aware that that was a role. I didn't know that was something one could be when one grew up. And I ended up going to law school. My parents very much wanted me to go to law school, and I did, and I made them happy. And I ended up doing a lot of project management as a lawyer, which I didn't even realize I was doing. I was just always a very organized person, and I did a lot of risk analysis as an attorney. We would analyze contracts and think of all the things that could go wrong and all the different things that we would help with. So that's how I ended up getting into it. I really like tech a lot, which, as you could see from earlier, to me that's just a puzzle to be figured out, and we did, and we're here. So did you want more of a setup, or is that good enough?
No, I think that's good. That paints the picture. And this is like, we've got a lot of parallels, although I didn't pursue the legal stuff in the beginning. I pursued this pursuit of science. So as a PhD scientist, that was the path I went on. But a lot of crisscross with you in the sense of getting into software, getting into rolling out projects from enterprise transformations to just even go to market for little guys, startups to the big guys. And you're right. There's so many things that you don't appreciate until you're in it. Like, for example, the importance of project management. And we're seeing it today in a lot of youth because it comes in the form of, or a lack thereof, executive function. So maybe talk to us about that, what you're seeing with respect to youth today, and maybe getting into some of that area where project management could really help them with executive function if they mapped out their day, for example.
Okay, so I had my 7 different tips. Yeah. And a lot of things we don't necessarily think about as project management are actually officially project management according to, project management, the playbook, that we call the PMBOK, things like that. But I want to talk about not only what the project management principles are and how you can use them in real life, but also for high school and college students and or their parents. Some of these things are things you can take advantage of now, but they'll actually help you later on when you're working for a company or if you go out on your own. And it's just sometimes I was doing them without realizing I was doing them. And then after I had the formal training, I did them even better. So it was like the organization I had as a kid on steroids. So that was a really great opportunity. So what I was going to say, the first thing I wanted to talk about was communication skills. And communication skills are something that we all know that we need, but we don't necessarily realize that those are part of project management. And the reason they're part of project management is because no project is standing alone. It's always to serve people. And you need to know all the different people, all the different stakeholders. So let's say you were talking to me before about, starting your day at school. So You're going to be speaking with your teachers. You're going to be speaking with the other students. So those are all stakeholders in a project. The principal is also a stakeholder. Your parents are stakeholders. They're sending you to school to make sure that you learn what you need to learn. And so there's a lot of different stakeholders, and learning how to communicate with them the best way is really important. So one of those things generally is that when you're speaking with people, you're assuming good intent. You're assuming that the person who is speaking with you has your best interest at heart, unless it's very obvious that they do not, and that can be determined in varying ways. You're listening to understand rather than speak. And the difference there is that we've all been in a room in a group where there's somebody who blurts things out, or they don't let the person finish their sentence before they want to say something. And often, again, assuming good intent, that person may fear that they will forget what they wanted to say if they don't get it out. But generally speaking, when we're listening to other people, you want to nod, you want to understand, and you can take notes. I have been known to take out my phone and take notes on my phone, which may be seen as rude, but if somebody asks me about it, I just say, I'm taking notes. I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm taking notes on it because I want to be sure that I've gotten everything. And then with my mediation skills, another thing is understanding. So sometimes you will repeat back exactly what you think you heard to make sure that the other person is taking that correctly, because you may have heard something that was not their intention. You may not have gotten it right. And sometimes it takes once or twice to go back and forth to make sure that you understand. Without a true understanding, it's a problem, because then you really haven't communicated. And then again, with assumptions, if someone's telling you something is a certain way, you want to trust, but also verify. So if someone's telling you, okay, we're all going to be going to this location at this time, then you may want to just check and see, is it actually open? Is the bus running that day? For instance, I was at the library the other day and it was closed. And I didn't realize that it was closed. So, theoretically, I could have gone, I went on Google and it said it was open. So they just didn't update their listing, and that's okay. But sometimes we all make assumptions in life and in projects, but if we haven't checked, we just don't know. So communication skills is key. Then another one, my second one, is leadership, what I call managing without authority, delegating and influencing. A lot of times you think, okay, well, you're a high school student, you're a college student. Are you really leading? Are you in a position to be delegating? Often you are, and often you're actually influencing people who are managing you. Just because you are trying to influence somebody does not mean that you are managing them. Sometimes they manage you, but you're still trying to influence them. So the question then is, how do you get people to do things when you have no authority over them? And the example from project management is often a project manager is not who the team reports to, really. The team each has their own manager, like the engineers have their manager and the solutions architect has their manager. And you're in charge of the project and you're trying to influence people to do the things you want them to do, certain tasks, but you don't really have authority. So there, the answer is that you're trying to influence them and lead by example. So this is a great thing in real life, because let's say it's your parents and you've decided that you want to take a particular course. Like when I was in high school, and I don't know if it's still this way, I wanted to take typing and accounting, and those were not the courses that were the courses I was supposed to be taking. I was on the college track. I was not in the business track, and I ended up giving up my lunch in order to take those courses. Now everybody has keyboarding. I know that because I've got my own 3 adult kids. But I had to influence my parents and the school to allow me to do this because it wasn't the usual. And I did that by telling them all the things I'd be able to do if I took those courses. I'd be able to work part-time during high school and during college to help pay for my school if I could type and I could do bookkeeping. These were things that I wouldn't be able to do. I would be kind of stuck if I didn't have them. So they allowed me to do it, and I gave up my lunch, but I was willing to.
There's always a sacrifice, right? You've got to be able to go in and say, okay, is the goal, like as I say, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? It's good that you've learned typing and all of these things, right? And you put the time in and, okay, what did I get out of it?
Oh, it was so worth it. I was able to end up with, no loans and no debt when I graduated. It was totally worth it.
That's
So
not bad.
one of the other ways that you can get what I call buy-in from stakeholders is ask them how they would handle it, because it gives them some input and some ownership. So people are more likely to do something if they're buying in with their own ideas. And one of the examples is, let's say, and this is, I'm sure everyone can relate to this as a parent, you want your child, let's say, to clean their room. So, or they come to you with a problem, a math problem, let's say, and they just come and say, okay, well, I'm not able to do this. So the question then is, well, what have you tried?
Right.
Right. Which, if they haven't tried anything, if they've just looked at the paper and they come back to you and say, I don't want to do this, right? I, with
That's
my
code,
own kids,
right?
right. I, with my own kids, was not going to necessarily go in there and do their homework. It's, what have you tried so far? And if they have tried something, they at least tell me what they've tried. So one of those, for instance, is, let's say that your kid, isn't doing well on a particular topic, and they have gotten a bad grade, whatever that means to you, like, no judgment here, on a test, and they're trying to get a higher grade. So the question then is, well, what have you done? And if they just say, well, I'm just going to study harder, my answer, and I had said this to my children, was, don't do the same thing you already did more, because that's just going to take you in a worse place, right? You have to figure out something different, not more of the same. So then asking them what they think would be a good idea. So maybe, they might say, talking to the teacher. Okay, great. Let's make an appointment with your teacher. Or maybe I can go to the math club after school and get help there. So the idea is they're more likely to show up at math club if they came up with the idea of going to math club. If you just say to them, you're going to math club because this is not a good grade, then they're not going to want to do it. And they're less likely
rebellion, right?
Right. Right. So there's ways to influence people without actually, just saying, putting your foot down and saying, this is the way that it is, my way or the highway. Also, when you're like, let's say you're being a chair at a club at school. So let's say you're in charge of I don't know what kind of clubs they have, the computer club or the choir or something like that.
Some committee, PTA, something. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to always have situations where there's going to be people who are either not agreeing with you or nobody wants to participate. How hard is it to get a volunteer these days? I always jokingly use the word voluntold, because a lot of times people will say, oh, you're going to do pizza again this year, right? You're going to be the pizza chairman. I've had that said to me. And book fair and things like that. I actually had a kid recently who's grown up now. Oh, I remember you. You were the book fair lady. And that kind of cracked me up. But yes, I did the book fair every year because nobody else wanted to do it. So these are the kinds of situations where you'll be able to use these delegation skills and leadership skills to essentially convince people to do the things that need to get done. And eventually, when you're out in the real world and you're working, these are really great because you might be managing a team. You might be just trying to get one person to do something. But we all have these interpersonal relationships that we have to manage. And it's nice to have a little bit of ideas of how to do it. So another part of project management is something that I like to call a requirements gathering and scoping the project. And I know that sounds very corporate speak and techie, but essentially whenever there's a project, you always have to ask, should there be a project? Is this something we even want to do? And then when you have to figure out what the project contains, all the different tasks, the timelines, the budget, all of that, you need to figure out what that is and talk to the various people involved. So if there are other people involved, which there almost always are, and the project is usually to benefit them, we need to be sure that we know all the different tasks, what it is that they need. And here's again, where people may tell you what it is that they need. And you have to also really, verify that that is in fact what they need. And one of the, I think, most famous stories of this is Henry Ford was once asked about his Model T. And he said that if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And instead he invented the Model T. So it actually solved the problem that they were having, but it wasn't what they would have said that they wanted. And that's a really good example of requirements gathering. So now we're going to talk about one of my absolute favorites. I'm just going to grab some water. Sorry.
Sure,
Again, as a
go
project
ahead.
manager, the water does not go on the desk. The computer is on.
That is smart, having seen laptops just be destroyed with soda, iced coffee. Yeah.
Right. So the drinks are all on a different table. There's no chance of spillage, and this is how I live my life. So risk analysis and mitigation planning. It's one of my favorite topics. It's something that I've really been trained for. And I find that they can actually reduce anxiety. Although when I went to law school, we were taught how to anticipate every risk. And I once attended a presentation from the Bar Association where a psychologist talked about the fact that when people go to law school, they have anticipated anxiety because they teach us all the things that could go wrong, and we can't turn that off, and we can't turn our brain off. But I found with studying project management and getting my certifications that there's a way to make that work for you. And actually, it calms me down unbelievably. So what I'm going to talk about now is something called a risk register. We're not doing any show and tell today, and if anybody's interested, I can always show them what that looks like later. But a risk register is essentially, if you can picture any kind of a table or an Excel spreadsheet, you're putting each and every risk that you can think of. And because of my training, I can think of a lot of risks. And also you're putting in the likelihood of that risk happening, the impact to your project if that risk happens, and then what we call mitigation steps. Mitigating means making it less bad. So we have all of those and each and every risk in the project. And you can use this in real life too. And I'm going to explain why it is that I think it's good, and then I'll give an example. So a lot of you may have heard about things like visualization, and you should think about how it's going to be and sort of practice or rehearse in your head. Like when I knew that I was going to be coming and speaking on this program, I was thinking about how it was going to go, what I was going to talk about, all the different things that could go wrong, including the tech issues we had earlier, which
Not
is why
being able to log in. Always a problem to get the show
we
started.
met 15 minutes beforehand to make sure that we had all of that done. So see, that was our mitigation step. And, all of those kinds of things. So with the visualization, it's great to visualize. It's great to rehearse. But with a risk register, what you're actually doing is you're writing it all down. And when I say writing, it could be writing, or it could be putting something on a computer, on a tablet, something like that. The idea is to memorialize it, document it, and not just keep it up here. So it has a calming effect, because if the bad thing happens, you've already realized it could. It's not a surprise. You've thought about how you might address it. And that really, for me at least, is very helpful, because then I'm not worrying about it. I've already put it to rest because I know that I've got a plan. And I love planning. So I'm going to give you an example of a risk. And this is actually kind of a funny one. And it's really not a big one. We went to go see a whole bunch of schools with our son when he was looking for schools. And with one of them, we had to go to this presentation. And when we got there was not enough parking, which was something that we hadn't taken into account. This was years ago. But there was parking in the faculty lot. And there was a sign saying that you had to have a permit and you had to be faculty in order to park there. Uh-oh. And we're sitting there like, okay, what's the worst thing that can happen? So luckily for us, someone else had just parked there who was faculty. And we asked them, what happens if you park here and you're not faculty? And they said, oh, you could get a $20 ticket. And we're from New York, so it costs $45 to park here, right?
For 30 minutes.
So, yeah. Right. So, and it was only going to be for an hour. So we thought, okay, if the worst thing that's going to happen is that we have to pay $20, that's a bargain. We're willing to take that risk. And we ran into the building. We got to the presentation on time, and we were calm because we knew that we were good. Now, when we came out, there was also no ticket, which was even better. And you can't always count on luck, but you can count on risk. If we're willing to spend $20 to park, then that was worth the risk. If they told us that they tow we probably would not have left the car there,
Mhm.
because that would have created many, many more problems. And we just would have left our son at the door. He would have gone in by himself, and we would have just sat in the car and waited for him. But those are the kinds of practical things. And that obviously was a very quick, short thing where we didn't have a whole risk register. But there have been projects that I've worked on where we have literally 99 different risks. And you can, I would say 95 to 99% of the time, predict all the risks in any kind of a project. There are times you cannot. For instance, a few weeks ago, there was an earthquake in New Jersey, and it shook here. That was not on my bingo card. I did not have earthquake as part of any of my risk plans. And I believe it was also one about 6 months before that. So
That
now
one
this happened.
is big.
Yes. Now that it's happened twice in less than a year, that is now going to be a risk that is going to be added to my risk register for any on-site project that I have involving technology, because guess what? The New York metro area now has earthquakes as a possibility. So that's definitely something that we need to take into account.
And I'm curious, Deb, you said you've got 3 grown children now. Have they adopted your strategies, like creating a risk register or just really being very planful and methodical in all that they do? How are they? Because sometimes kids go the other way. They're like, oh, mom did it, so therefore we're not, right?
Yeah, well, generally speaking, I think that they have. I know that they're sometimes are asking me my opinion about something, but there have been times where one of my kids, as an example, was in Florida when a hurricane was about to hit, and we were talking about the getting out of the area, and they were going to drive their car to Orlando. And I immediately said that I didn't think that was the way to handle it, because my concern was they were going to get there and there'd be no gas, no food, no hotel, and they'd actually be in a worse position. So I suggested that they get a plane to Toronto. And before I had a chance to explain that I knew already that Air Canada had added an extra 20 flights, they said there are no flights. I said there are no domestic flights. There are international flights. And if your goal is to get out of Florida, it does not matter where you go. All you need to do is get a plane. So, yeah, I do think that they've adopted a lot of what I have taught them, but I can't say for each and every risk that they're making a risk register. Like I said, when we had to park, that's too short of a situation, but it's just an example of how you can use that thought process in real life. But for any kind of a real, like, let's say you're deciding which college you want to go to. Okay. So let's say you've decided, you've narrowed down to 10 colleges that you're interested in. And then you only want to actually apply to 5, because let's face it, it costs a lot of money to apply and to go visit the colleges and all of those things.
Yeah.
Right. So then part of the risks are, for instance, one of the risks is you will not have a job when you graduate. That's a risk. Or that you will have too much debt when you graduate. So those are things you definitely want to take that into account. That is a whole project, going and looking at colleges. And the likelihood is, you know, if you're going to a school that is a quote unquote named school, where it's very, very likely that they have very good recruiting and that there's a whole huge alumni that are going to be more willing to, let's say, you know, talk to you, hire you, etc. So that is not going to be as high of a risk as if you go to a school that is not like that. But that also, that school might be less expensive. And if your ultimate goal is to go to law school or med school or something like that, that might be great, right? That would suit you because you wanted to spend your money on the school that you're going to graduate from for grad school. So all of those things are things that you can use the risk register for.
Excellent. Well, are we ready for tip 5?
I'm ready for it, unless you had a scenario you wanted me to.
No. I think that explained it really clearly, because that's our audience. We've got a lot of parents and a lot of youths who are largely in that high school to college age range and trying to figure out, well, what do I do next? Or I'm panicked, a lot of anxiety out there, a lot of uncertainty in every aspect of our lives, from climate to politics to economics, all of that. So kids are worried. So these are good tips on how to really just streamline their anxiety by planning for it and being ready. Oh, this could happen. And that's exactly why we give the 15 minutes before, because something always goes on, or a guest is slightly late, or, you know. You got to
Right.
plan for it. All right, tip 5.
I'll be talking about that in tip number 6, the project plan scheduling. It's called buffer.
Oh.
So let's talk about number 5, which is budgeting in planning. People don't necessarily think about it, but project planners are also dealing with budgeting. How much something should cost. We talk about what it should cost at the beginning and then tracking the amount used versus what's left.
Mm-hmm.
We call that a burn down. It's essentially, and I'm going to give you the example of, let's say that you're given a project, you've got $1,000 marketing budget for pay-per-click ads. I'm assuming everyone knows what pay-per-click ads are. Those are those ads on Google and other sites where people click and you have to pay each time they click. So you see that in the first hour, $500 has already been spent, and you wanted this campaign to be a week long. So clearly, your estimate was off, and you have to figure out and decide what to do. Now, you may decide to just let it run its course, and the campaign will only go for one day. Or you may decide to halt it and put out enough for, an hour the next day and an hour the next day. And those are decisions you'll be able to make because you'll be basically be seeing that budget and understanding how that works. It also helps inform other decisions about the project, whether to continue on the same path, whether you're going to change the project. Sometimes you decide, okay, we'll just not do the whole phase now. We'll have a phase for later, and we'll get funding and pay for it later. Sometimes you say, no, we have to do everything now. We've got to get the funding, and you have to figure those things out. But the budgeting is important, and I think in real life, knowing how to budget is also really important. I don't recall growing up in school that we were taught anything about budgeting. It was more a matter of, where do you want to go to school? And then, the parents are like, okay, and how are we going to pay for this? And the kids themselves did not necessarily have any buy-in there with the budget. Whereas now, like, one of my kids got a half scholarship to school, and that was part of their decision-making process. Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, I don't think the high school kids were as involved in the money aspect of it. It wasn't considered appropriate for the kids to be, thinking about the money. But I feel that it's important to know how to budget. It's important to know how to budget, especially when you're at college. I don't know if they're still handing out credit cards like candy, like they did when I went to school. But you definitely want to understand what you're doing with those, or you could wind up starting out with your new job in debt, which none of us want to do. So now we're going to get to number 6, which is project plan scheduling. This is where we want to know all what we call the deliverables in advance. Deliverables are all the things that are supposed to be delivered during the project. You never want a situation where you're in a project and somebody is expecting something to be part of it when it actually is not. You don't want to be the person who's not getting what you thought you were getting. And you also don't want to be the person who's not delivering what the other party thought you were going to deliver. So you want to have that all either written down on paper or in some sort of software, so it's very clear all the things that are in the scope of that project. Also very important is knowing the deadline. A lot of times knowing the deadline, if you have a hard and fast deadline, you're going to work backward to break up each of the tasks into tasks and subtasks, and you leave buffer in case something happens. We did today. We had 15 minutes just in case. So I use a lot of software to track and forecast, and I'll give you an example of a really simple process, not a project, and then I'll give you an example of more of a project. So a process is you have to be at school at 8 a.m. every morning, and you have to be there with the right clothes, your books, your lunch. So how do you know that you're going to get to school at 8 a.m.? You plan backward from 8 a.m. to make sure all the tasks are done and leave time for traffic, or if you take the bus, to get to the bus on time so that you don't miss it. And what you might do is you might set your things out the night before, or maybe you just get up half an hour earlier so that you can do them all in advance. And you make sure that you have time, you know how long it takes you to eat breakfast, brush your teeth, all of those things. So let's say you've got to be at school at 8, perhaps you're getting up at 7 in order to accomplish all those tasks. And you don't think of that as a process, but it actually is. Mm-hmm. Some people call it a morning routine, but from a project management perspective, that is a process. So another example of a project is something, sorry, grabbing some more water here.
No worries.
Like the prom, which everyone looks forward to. And in college, there's also what they have, the formals, all kinds of formal parties there too. So let's say you are one of the chair people on the prom. You have been tasked with creating the prom that is supposed to be the event that everybody is going to enjoy and remember for the rest of their lives. No pressure here. You get the date. You work backwards from there, including the tasks such as getting the venue, getting the music, the food, the commitments from the attendees. How are you going to collect the funds? What is the budget of the party? The schedules, who's going to make a speech? When is the dancing happening? When is the food being served? All of those things. And you know, for instance, that if you have a date sometime in June, which is usually when they are, you need a certain amount of time. The invitations have to go out, even if you're not doing paper invitations, even if you're doing the e-invitations, they still have to go out in enough time for people to be able to decide if they can go, who they're going with, what they're wearing, and answer you in enough time for you to tell the caterer how much food. These days, I myself have dietary issues. Everyone else does. You got to make sure everyone's got that covered, right? Everybody has something to eat. You got to have chaperones, all of those things. So that's kind of a larger project. So that's a case where software would be really, really helpful because you can put each and everything in. And what I love about project management software is if somebody has the idea, well, what would happen if we moved this up by a week, or if we decided to move this to that date instead? When you have it all in the software, there's something called a Gantt chart view, where it shows the different tasks and the relativity amongst the tasks. And if you're moving something out, let's say to a week later, everything that comes after that, there's a little red line that will appear, or a little black line, depending on which software you're using. And it's going to alert you, yeah, that's not such a good idea, because if you move that, everything else gets moved, because none of these things can happen until that one is done. And you're going to be late, and everything's going to be lovely, but it's going to be after the prom. No, it has to be for the prom. So it'll show you that you have to get it done by that date. And that's where you leave the buffers. So you give yourself a couple of extra days in between for risks, like somebody couldn't come to the meeting because they weren't feeling well. Something ended up coming up in cost, like eggs, all kinds of things. There's always something that's going on. So that's one of the reasons I love the software. It makes it really clear that you have to make some decisions, and that the decision that you're thinking of making may not be the best one. So it clues you in.
Right. Helps you understand what that potential ripple effect will be, right? The consequences of something being delayed and a critical path, right? All of that good stuff. And we're almost out of time. So let's bring it home here to tip 7. What have you got?
Okay. Tip 7, retrospectives. These are great. After a project, a full analysis of what went wrong and what went right. The reason you're doing that is because you want to understand what went wrong so that you do not repeat it. And you also want to understand what went right so that you can repeat that. Because if it went well, you want to do that same thing again. We also have something called root cause analysis, which will help you understand exactly what the reasons were. It's really, really helpful for grades, especially, like I was saying before, in terms of studying. If you did something and it didn't go well, don't do the same thing. Do something else.
All right. So with that, I think we have just about a wrap here on the 7 tips to project manage your life. And one thing I was curious about on your website, right, DeFacto Project Manager, you're standing above a book, and the book is Ikigai. And so not many people are practitioners, at least here in the, I guess, the US, practitioners of Ikigai. So I was curious why you picked that as a book as a project manager when there's so many other books relative, more to your field and industry. So that's a question.
Okay, that's a great question. I've actually not been asked that before. So there are a few reasons. One of the reasons the photographer wanted that book, because I brought several books with me. The photographer wanted it because it was blue and it matched the blue in my office, which sounds insane. But for the photography for the website, he was very concerned with the aesthetic. If you're asking me why I own that book, I'm a huge fan of Japan. I was actually just there in November. My kids and I play a lot of video games. I love tech, and anything that's Japanese culture is something that fascinates me. And there are a lot of books on project management. The company's called DeFacto PM, because most people are de facto PMs. I have all the certifications, but I help people who don't have the certifications, and they are the de facto PM. And there's always improvement that can be had that way.
Oh, excellent. So Deb, you've given us a lot of insights here. Like I said, I just wanted to see the connection. You never know. And it's something as almost silly, right? That the photographer said, oh, but the aesthetic, it matches, it's the color I need. But then when you dig deeper, right, that's what I like to do. It's like, what's that question behind the question? Really, like, why did it happen, right? Towards some of the sort of, I guess, principles of root cause analysis and all of that. Just keep asking why until you get the answers and you're stuck.
Right.
So with that, I want to thank you very much. Deb Kaminetzky, DeFacto PM is her company. She is a specialist in all kinds of things related to project management. And what we're really excited about the tips that she shared here with respect to project planning your life. There's all kinds of things that you can do. Take that anxiety off. Really just comes down to maybe 2 more words, right? Be planful, right? Prepare.
Be prepared. That's right.
All right, Deb, thanks so much for being on our show on HELPtalk today.
Thank you so much for having me.